Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome back for more Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get rolling with 5 great stories about strange government facilities. Starting off strong with a classic, let's take another trip back to one of the black sites while we investigate Black Site 7.
I'm in the wind now. I'm sure I'll be dead by tomorrow, but I need to let people know this thing is loose. I'm an agent with the United States government, and my station is Black Site number 7. I won't tell you my name. It wouldn't matter much anyway, but this was not how I saw my life going. I spent 6 years in Iraq, signed up right after high school. It was nothing like the recruiter told me it would be. I spent 8 hours in the blistering heat. I hauled my fair share of comrades out of firefights, and I saw a lot of crap out there that would make an ordinary person go crazier than I might be. I've had a camel spider crawl on me while I sleep. I watched friends I've known since basic get decapitated through binoculars, burned houses full of insurgents and civilians to rubble, and a lot of other things I really don't like to talk about. When I was done, they gave me my papers, thanked me for my service, and sent me home. I know I have no right to complain. Many guys didn't make it back, but home was worse. I'd spent 6 years in an active combat zone, and now I was just, supposed to come home and go back to civilian life? I spent 3 months in the civilian world. 2 of those months were spent in crappy apartments because my parents couldn't handle the night terrors and the jumpy Marine that their son had become. Every car horn, every barking dog, every firework rattling in the street had me reaching for my gun or breaking into a cold sweat when I couldn't find it. Before TJ found me, I was honestly considering killing myself. Then one day, he was just at my door with that big shit-eating grin he'd always worn in the desert. "You look like hell, Hoss. Let me get you some pancakes. I got something I want to discuss with you." TJ was my platoon leader in the sandbox. They called him the comedian because he was always smiling, always cracking jokes. He was a functional sociopath. I guess most of us were. I always admired his ability to laugh in the face of the messed up stuff we did. TJ is not his real name, clearly, but since he's still in this crap and I've left it behind, I figure the best I can do is not remind them that he's why I'm here. So he took me to breakfast. In the back of a crowded Denny's, he laid it all out for me. "You got it bad, Hoss, but that's okay, 'cause old Uncle TJ has the cure for you. Got a new job, familiar work that might interest you. Ever hear of Two Trees?" As it happened, I had. Two Trees was a government institute that, on the surface, did a lot of medical research and clinical trials. Underneath, though, they did wet work, and anyone who was involved in covert ops knew about Two Trees. We'd worked with them a few times in Iraq, and their guys were spooky, to say the least. "You're looking at the new head of Black Site number 7. I furrowed my brow at him. "Congrats. Should I know what that is?" "Of course not. It's a closely guarded government secret. Two Trees is paying me a small fortune to keep it that way. Problem is, I need someone to curate the site for me. Someone with military training, experience with firearms, and a need for some normalcy. Know anyone that might fit that bill, Hoss?" I knew what he was asking, but I didn't think I was the one he was looking for. I hadn't found work in 3 months since I'd been back, and most of that was because I couldn't settle into anything. I was constantly jumpy, constantly on edge, and that makes it hard to find work. No one wanted you doing security work or minding a gas station when every backfiring car was an enemy combatant. What would happen if I had an episode in a government facility of all places? I shook my head. "Thanks, but no thanks. I don't think I'm fit for duty the way I am." "Yeah, I thought you might say that." He pulled a metal tin out of his front pocket and slid it across the table. "Your medical file reads like a bench work for PTSD. Night terrors, irritability, being on edge, those irrational bouts of anger that got you thrown out of your parents' house." I felt defensive. "How did you know about that?" "You'd be surprised what my level of clearance will get you. The therapist records were about as hard to get as a beer at a gas station. Well, I got a little present for you, Hoss. Welcome to the rest of your life," he said, tapping the outside of the silver case. The case was about as big as an Altoids tin. There were no markings on it, no filigrees or needless ornaments, and it had the distinctly surgical look that you usually see with military tech. I slid my hand towards it, but I didn't seem to want to touch it. Every sense I had told me to walk away right now, not to touch that thing, and just walk away from this unassuming little case. I forced my hands to pop it open instead. Inside was a pair of gray gel caps. What are these? These are the answer to your prayers. 2 of these a day will make you feel as calm and clear as you did when you were a lad of 18. No more jumping at every noise. No more reaching for your gun when a dog barks or a car backfires. Just peace of mind. Looking back, that's probably what Mephistopheles said when he spoke to Faust. What's the catch? These pills are only available through the Two Trees Corporation. Employees who agree to be part of the clinical trials get them free of charge. But they're only available to employees, he said, with a little grin. Take them. Take a day to feel the effects, and let me know what you think. Call me tomorrow and give me your answer. Enjoy a night of freedom, then make your decision. I took the pills home with me, and after a few hours of staring at them, I took them with some vodka. The effects were sudden and immediate. If you've never had PTSD, then it's hard to explain, but it's like having a loose wire and someone suddenly fixes it. Then you go back to the way you used to be. My anxiety just melted away. My fear dissipated. My unease and dread were gone, and my anger seemed like a distant memory. I was sitting in my crappy apartment, surrounded by the trappings of my depression and my anxiety, and suddenly, I felt like I had before I boarded that bus in 2003 and headed out to basic training. I was finally comfortable in my own head. It was like coming back to a safe place after years of running from danger. After the first good night's sleep I'd had since shipping out, I called TJ and told him I was in. One question, I asked. What's in the pills that makes them work so well? He was silent for a long minute, and then finally he said, You really don't want to know, Hoss. Pack your stuff. There will be a moving truck to take you to West Virginia in the morning. And that is how I came to work at Black Site number 7. I must have looked like a junkie by the time I pulled up in front of my new house. I didn't have much. The truck had taken all 4 boxes into the deep woods as I followed in my old compact. The journey took me about 16 hours, and by the time I got there, I was starting to feel the anxiety creep back in. I became angry at how slow the truck was going, afraid that this whole thing was a trick and they would kill me. By the time I arrived, I found myself wanting to die, hoping for death, so I could return to the quiet that had been in my head before. That was when I saw TJ standing at the gate of what looked like an old military checkpoint. He flashed that knowing smile and handed me another silver case. I dry swallowed the pills without a word and felt the inner peace worming its way back into my brain. Then he showed me to my new quarters. It was a little bunk room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a locker for my clothes. There was a foot locker for my personal stuff, and I was told to keep the place clean. I would be responsible for the site and its security. TJ showed me a terminal off the bedroom for monitoring and camera feeds. The compound had cameras all over the place, but I appeared to be the only person here full-time. Site's mostly for storage these days, but it's what we get up to here at night that may interest you. That's why you're here. I need someone I can trust to watch this site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 4 times a year, you'll be relieved for a week of R&R somewhere. But other than that, this is your world, Hoss. That didn't bother me. I had no problem being alone after 3 months of people. What I was curious about was what I would be doing out here. What am I looking at exactly? TJ pointed at the 3 buildings on the camera. Truck comes twice a week. Let them through the gate and don't bother them. They'll take what they need from the building and won't bother you either. Keep nosy people out. Lethal force is authorized, and don't ever go in there, or I'll have to show you where Black Site 8 is, he said with a smile. The smile didn't make it to his eyes. Don't worry about being vigilant, though. If anything bigger than a mouse moves out there, the alarms will let you know about it right away. He told me that my food would be delivered once a week, mostly MREs, and I could order anything I wanted from the terminal in the living room. There was a workout yard near the second building, and I could move through the woods if I chose, as long as I took my phone with me so I could get alerts from the console. By the way, hand me your phone, he said. When I did, he put it in his pocket and handed me a new one. That's your new phone. I'll take the keys to your car, too, and put the money in your account. This is your life now, Hoss, so don't take this job lightly. If you leave the grounds, we'll know. If you try to update social media or try to tell anyone on the outside about what you've seen here, we'll know. If you want to get married or feel like you need out, arrangements can be made after your first 5-year tour. As far as anyone is concerned, you no longer exist. Don't be stupid. Put in your 5 years, and we'll reassess your position then. He grinned again and punched me in the arm. "And lighten up. This'll be the easiest 5 years of your life." From that point on, I was an employee of Two Trees. TJ had been right. The first 5 years flew by. I lived on the site, spending my days working out or watching TV. I played the latest video games and watched the newest movies. Twice a week, as advertised, a truck rolled up and honked. I would check the cameras, open the gates, and they would do the rest. They would honk when they were ready to leave, and I left them alone. The trucks always had the Two Trees logo on them, and they never popped in to give me any crap, and I never went out to give them any. I never tried to get into the warehouses. I'd been a soldier long enough to know how to check my curiosity, and the scares were minimal. The food kept coming, the pills kept coming, and kept me in the right mind, too, and it was pretty peaceful, all told. The alarms, to my knowledge, only went off 3 times in that first year. 2 of those times, it was a deer who had wandered too close. The first time it happened, I had slunk out in a panic, service pistol in hand and boxer shorts flapping. As I rounded the first warehouse, I drew down on a very surprised doe who darted away before I could draw a bead on her. It was kind of a special moment for me. I had never seen a deer up close, and as it ran away, I was glad I hadn't shot it. The third time the alarm went off, it was a person, though. It was the first person I'd seen in 3 months. I'd been sitting at the console one night watching the latest Marvel Avengers movie. I think it might have been Infinity Wars, when the alarm went off. I paused the movie, expecting to see a deer or a rabbit on the monitor. My eyes went wide, though, when I realized it was a person. He had a crowbar. He was attempting to pry the door open. He must have come out of the woods, because if he had driven up, I would have known about it sooner. It had been 3 months since I'd seen another person. The last one had been Agent Daughtry, who'd come to relieve me for a week of R&R in September. The idea of seeing a person not connected with Two Trees made me feel weird. Even when you were on R&R, you went to a company resort or a company place full of company people. This stopped you from getting a little too drunk and talking about all the stuff you did for your country. It was a great idea, but it meant you had nearly no interaction with civilians. I took my pistol out and crept up on him in near silence. When my foot came down on an extra crunchy stick, he turned his head and noticed me. He raised the crowbar as if to attack, and the rest was instinct. The gun went off without me having even spoken to him, reflexes taking over and dropping the threat before it could become a real danger. His left eye popped like an overripe fruit, and he fell down on the hard December ground. I called TJ, and he and some of the other men in suits came to assess the damage. "You did just right, Hoss. He was a threat to the facility and needed to be put down. Don't think for a minute that this reflects poorly on you." "What will you do with him?" I asked. TJ smiled. "Immediate disposal, Hoss. Think you got the stomach to help us?" I found that I did, and once he was doused in gasoline, we set him ablaze at the edge of the property. They gave me a week of R&R for that, and when I came back, TJ must have decided that I was worthy of being brought in on certain things. The alarm went off about a week after I'd come back from R&R, and I saw a black car rolling up the front gate. TJ stepped out of it and waved as it stopped in the concrete roundabout, other men getting out as well. I slid my shoulder holster on and went out to meet him. It was 11 p.m., and a visit this late was highly irregular. As I approached the vehicle, 2 guys in suits were bringing a man with a bag on his head out of the car. He was wearing scrubs, his hands bound behind his back, and I could hear him crying beneath the black hood he wore. I looked between them, waiting for an explanation, and TJ threw an arm around me and walked me towards the spot where we had burnt the trespasser. "Hoss, I think it's time that we bring you in on the second reason for black sites. You see, sometimes Two Trees has assets that need to be eliminated. The black sites are often used for this purpose. It's always the responsibility of the site's caretaker to carry out the elimination. Fringe benefits, I suppose you could say." "Why wasn't I told this before?" I asked, feeling indignant. "I'm no murderer." "Oh, well, those combatants in Iraq will be glad to hear that, won't they?" he said almost snidely. "That was war, TJ. This is murder. Think of this as war too, Hoss. These people are enemies, and they need to be eliminated for the good of the public safety. It's part of the job, Hoss, a part I know firsthand that you're capable of." They put the man on his knees in the middle of the burn spot, and I could hear him praying under that hood as we stood around him. "Put him down, Hoss. That's an order," TJ said. "And if I won't?" I said, looking at him icily. The 2 men on either side drew their guns, and TJ grinned. "Then I'm afraid that these men will have to execute both of you. Come on, Hoss. Don't throw this away over some nobody. He's no different than the man outside the warehouse." Looking back, I kinda just wish I'd let them shoot me. But I guess if I had, you'd never know about any of this. Instead, I drew out my gun and put a bullet in his skull, glowering at TJ as his buddies put their guns away. You made the right choice, Hoss. Who knows? You might not have to do this more than a dozen times in the next 4 years. On that note, he was wrong. I executed an asset a month after that. They were mostly people in scrubs, people in lab coats, doctors, researchers, people who had likely tried to steal from whatever facility they worked at. They were men, women, old men, and scared 20-somethings. I never bothered to learn their names. They were just assets that needed to be eliminated. I became kind of numb to the process. We burned them afterwards. Gasoline and fire made it like they were never there. The spot near the edge had a charred look to it for a while after that. At the end of 5 years, TJ came to see me and asked if I wanted to re-up. What happens if I walk away? I asked. I was eating dinner when he came by, and he had sat down to have a plate of fettuccine with me. Given my free time, I had learned to do a good number of things that I couldn't before. I became a pretty good cook. I learned to play the guitar, read every book on the shelf I had bought to hold them, and there was a chainsaw out back along with some sculptures I had made with it. I couldn't say I hadn't enjoyed my time here, the killings aside, but I was curious to know if they'd actually let me leave. You'll be allowed to return to the real world, your bank account fuller and your retirement substantial. Just watch what you say out there. I'd hate to have to bring you back for your replacement to put a bullet in. I ended up signing up for another 4 years. I shouldn't have done that. I was 8 years deep when they brought the girl in the black bag to me. It was 2 a.m., and I had started to think about going to bed when the alarm went off. I saw the town car rolling up and looked for TJ. He was not the one that climbed out, however. This guy had his hair slicked back, his suit a perfect blue pinstripe. He didn't wave at me, and I felt a sense of dread as I grabbed my gun. Somehow I expected TJ to be under that bag this time. The man's name was Stein, and luckily he did not have TJ under that bag. What he did have was a kid with a thick black bag over their head. I couldn't tell at first if it was a boy or a girl. They were dressed in baggy clothes, Salvation Army rags that a homeless guy would be embarrassed to wear, and they were crying loudly under their hood. 2 familiar men had the kid, and they both looked stoic about the whole matter. Stein didn't say anything, just led the procession over to the charred spot and put the kid on their knees. When he didn't take the hood off, I did it myself. He winced, but he didn't stop me. This was my place, my job, and I had garnered a reputation for being a professional, a reputation I was about to ruin. The bag came off, and the little girl's tear-streaked face came into view in the harsh fluorescence. Her hair was cut short, dirty blonde, and her face was covered in bruises. Her nose looked broken, her lip split. The blood trickled down her face like red tears, and they mingled with her actual tears as they fell to the damp earth. I sighed, looking at Stein as the gun stayed at the ready. The hell is this? Stein looked surprised. It's an asset. TJ said you could handle these for us. Handle the asset. This is a kid, barely old enough to wipe her own ass. What could she have possibly done? Stein's face was stony. Yours is not to question, soldier. Liquidate this asset, or be liquidated. I looked at the kid, her whole face shaking as the tears and blood fell, and I thought about watching her head pop like a grape. This wasn't some scared adult, some stoic old man, some praying woman, or some cursing thing in a sallow skin. This was a kid. I had killed a lot of people, more in my time here than I ever had during war, but I was still a professional. Professionals had standards. No, I said. Stein blinked. What? No, I don't kill kids. Do it yourself. The 2 men drew their guns, and I was transported back in time. I was standing there, 2 days after Christmas, watching TJ grin and tell me the rules. Now I was standing in the woods, the autumn leaves carpeting the ground, feeling sure that it would soon drink both my blood and the girl's. I'll give you till the count of 3 to kill the girl. After that point, you will both be executed. 1. Their guns were unwavering, but so was my resolve. 2. I closed my eyes and prepared to die. 3. I heard a sound like wet concrete splitting open. It was followed by a high-pitched scream and a pair of bodies hitting the ground. I opened my eyes and saw Stein running towards the town car, his composure gone. The 2 men who'd been holding me at gunpoint were bleeding out on the ground from large, grisly neck wounds. As I watched Stein run, a rust-red something snapped out and caught him in the back of the neck, dropping him inches from the town car. The red thing protruded from the front of his neck, and he gasped futilely as he lay dying. I looked back in the direction of the thing that had snapped out and saw that the girl was now a mass of red spikes, segmented like spider legs. Her face had split down long ways, forcing her face into a grisly sideways maw. The area between the teeth glowed a deep red, and I could see the eyes on the girl's face blinking erratically. The two halves of her smile grinned at me, and the effect was a little dizzying. I figured for the second time that day that I was going to die, but she scuttled off into the woods instead, walking on her strange spidery appendages as she crashed through the trees. I stood there for a few minutes, not quite sure I believed I wasn't dead, and then I started running too. I crashed through the woods for hours, running in no particular direction, sure that at any minute the creature or a helicopter from Two Trees would fall on me and either rip me to pieces or just blow me away. I was blundering off with no wallet, no cell phone, just my gun and the clothes I'd been wearing. Was the phone how they tracked me? TJ hadn't said as much, but I kind of figured it was. When the ground went out from under me, I felt the air drop out of my lungs. I fell 5 feet off the muddy ledge and skinned my hands. My knees hurt where I had landed on them, and I realized pretty quick that I had fallen onto the road. If I thought it might be an illusion, the headlights that pinned me to the ground a moment later left me with little doubt. I was kind of numb to the idea of dying at this point, and I just lay there waiting to be run over. Thankfully, the truck stopped, and after a short conversation with the driver, he offered to take me into town. That's how I came to be here in this dingy hotel that just happens to have a computer in the lobby. I sold the gun for about $500 and figured I'd disappear as soon as I'm done writing this. They know I'm gone now, but I don't know if they think I'm dead or if they think I ran. Either way, they'll find me. I'm pretty sure of it. I'm more worried about the little girl that's loose in the woods, and whatever it is that's living beneath their skin. If you see a young girl with short, dirty blonde hair, do not approach her. I don't know if she killed those men to get away, or if she killed them because she wanted to, but she should be considered dangerous if you encounter her in the wild. And if a man from Two Trees offers you a job, do not become the new curator of Black Site 7. The job is definitely not at all what it appears to be.
Looks like they might have an opening. Might be a good time to go ahead and get your application in. Coming up next, we have a facility tracking an odd signal from beyond, well, the beyond. Let's hear a story about boots.
F01. Sending. I counted to 5, and when nothing came back, I scrubbed a line through it. No contact. F02. Sending. I sent the packet. Counted to 5. When nothing came back, I scrubbed a line through it. No contact. F03. If this sounds like tedious work to you, then that's because it is. I've spent the better part of 5 years getting my degree in things like string theory and space anomalies, but those kinds of degrees require money. That money has to come from somewhere, and in my case, that somewhere was a job at a scientific research lab. When I wasn't working on my doctorate, of course. I mostly worked on the weekends, doing different things that fell under the heading of my field of study, but a lot of the work came with NDAs and contracts stating how I would never speak of anything I worked on outside the facility, or to anyone without similar clearance inside the facility, for that matter. I could probably get in a lot of trouble for talking about what I'm about to talk about, but I think it needs to be told. You guys need to know what's going on, because it could potentially affect everyone on this planet. For the last 6 months, I've been involved in something called the Bottle Project. The Bottle Project is, as its name implies, about sending messages out to try to get a response. Messages to who, you might ask? Well, messages to other life forms outside of our dimension. The research facility that I work at has a machine. It's a machine that I don't understand, and it's a machine that I don't ask a lot of questions about. What it amounts to is a big metal hatch with an apparatus similar to an iron lung connected to the wall. When you use the machine, you send a message through the iron lung and into the hatch. The messages are sent in a similar fashion to phone calls. It was decided that if whoever was receiving the messages was on a technological level like ours, then they should be able to encounter and decipher something on the basis of a sound call and return a similar message. Your next question will undoubtedly be, well, who are we sending these messages to? And the answer to that might surprise you. I'd been working here for a couple of weeks before I found out myself. Most people are tight-lipped about it, but I had found common ground with my then manager and got some answers out of him in a very unscientific way. We went out for drinks one night after work, and I asked him who we were sending all these voicemails to. He laughed, and he told me that at the start of the project, they were sending them into space, deep space. We were hoping to get messages back from helpful aliens who might tell us how to go to the stars or how to advance our civilization. What we got was a bunch of dead air for the next 20-some-odd years. Turns out, nobody was in a big hurry to help us. They either aren't there or they don't care, and it amounts to the same thing. So that's when one of the old heads, Dr. Klein, had a great idea to invent that machine that you sit about 5 feet away from every day. He decided that maybe the answer wasn't in another species, but in our own. I asked him what he meant, and he glanced around like he was looking for eavesdroppers before he went on. I shouldn't be telling you this. No one is supposed to know this without some pretty heavy clearance. But that machine sends messages to other dimensions. I thought he was pulling my leg for a minute, having a little fun with the new guy, but he assured me that he was 100% on the level. I know what it sounds like. I didn't believe it myself when they first told me. But I swear, it's the truth. Dr. Klein decided that there had to be a dimension out there where we had figured out faster than light travel. He decided that if we could send messages to one of those universes, then maybe they would help us out. That was 2010, and we've been sending those messages in a bottle ever since. I asked him if he'd ever gotten a response, and he gave me this look that was equal parts pity and amusement. How long you been working on the project? I told him about a month. How many messages have you received? I told him none. The letter in front of the dimension should tell you how many times we've done this. Each collective is given an alphabet letter, and each letter has about 99 confirmed locations. I believe you're up to D now, and to my knowledge, we've only received about 5 responses in the whole life of the project. I asked him about those responses, but not even the liquor could make him talk about those. You're a good kid, but if I told you, you'd probably quit tomorrow. Those messages... He got a faraway look before taking another drink. They're the kind of thing that you have to experience for yourself. That had excited me a little bit. I really wanted to get a response, so I kept sending my messages out into the universe, waiting for the day when I might get my own response back. What could these other places tell us? What knowledge could they share, and what secrets might they help us uncover? It was pretty exciting. At least it was then. That had been 6 months ago, and I'd been plodding along through the alphabet ever since. Every now and again I would get something, and that was the kind of thing that kept me going. Every now and again I would get static or a weird tone, and per protocol I would log it and send it to my supervisor. If they actually learned anything from them, they never said. They always just thanked me and told me to keep at it. I kept at it, but I never felt like I was getting anywhere. That's how I came to be sitting at my desk at 23:45 on a Saturday. That's how I came to be at my station when I got my first response. F04 sending. I was counting, about to scrub through and move on, when I heard something on the other end. It was weak, like a voice heard over the radio, but it was the most that I had ever heard, and it filled me with a sense of excitement and dread. I picked up the microphone, something I had never done before, and spoke into it haltingly. Hello? Can you read me? More static, some garbled words, and then it seemed to clear up, as if they were adjusting instruments on their end. "Hello? Hello! This is Eden Listening Station in the Sol system, Earth. Who am I speaking with?" It was my turn to go silent for a moment. That was English. Not just a human voice, but an English-speaking voice as well. I had been told that if I got a message back, it might not be in a language that I understood. I'd been told it might not be understandable at all, that it might even make me sick or make my head hurt. To get a message that sounded like it could be from someone no farther away than the next office over was amazing. "Hello? Are you still there?" I keyed up the mic, not wanting to lose them because of a misunderstanding. "Yeah, sorry. You surprised me. This is, Post M at the Medici Labs, a subsidiary of the United States government. Am I tried to think of what to say. Am I speaking with someone from a different dimension?" The voice on the other end sounded amused. "I could ask you the same question. We had assumed this transmission was from deep space, but I suppose it would be more advantageous if it was from another dimension entirely. Are you from Earth?" My hands shook as I remembered to turn on the recorder. My bosses would have been pretty upset if I had made contact and forgotten to record the exchange in my surprise. Yes. This is Earth. This is specifically the United States of America. The year is 2022, and the president is Joseph Biden." The voice on the other end laughed again, but seemed to think that it might be rude, as it ended quickly. "Sorry, but we don't have presidents anymore, so such an antiquated term seems a little silly. It's good to hear that you're from Earth. We haven't called ourselves the United States in over 100 years. We're now the Eden Collective of Nations." That was amazing. I'd never guessed that something like this could happen. I was dumbstruck for a moment as I tried to decide how to continue. The person on the other end of the transmission, however, didn't seem to have any such hang-ups. "I wonder, what is the purpose of your contacting us, if I might ask?" "I believe we're seeking to share technology and ideas," I hedged, wondering how much I was supposed to share with the voice on the radio. I believe my supervisors are hoping to find a means of faster-than-light travel." "Oh, is that all?" the voice said, almost laughing. "Well, perhaps we can help each other out. I'd love to speak more on the matter, but I do believe I am below the rank to do so. Is there someone you might put me through to, a supervisor or some such thing, so that we may continue this on a more official channel?" I told him that that's probably what my supervisor would want as well, and asked if they would hold while I made contact with the higher-ups. The next few weeks were extremely hectic. I was given a bonus and told to take a couple of weeks off for some well-earned rest. People shook my hand and told me that I'd done a great service to my country, but I just felt like I'd been doing my job. I'd really just been sending messages out without any hope of getting anything back, but it was hard to forget the voice on the other end as I sat for a couple of days and tried to keep it to myself. The voice had sounded familiar, even like somebody that I might know, but it had also sounded like one of those old radio broadcasts from the World War times. The newsreel stuff. The accent had definitely been American, but it had been laced with a strange underlay of British and maybe something else. I told myself it wasn't so hard to believe. If there had been a coalition of nations, then the English language would probably have been pretty mixed up. Still, it was hard to shake the World War II similarities in my head. The voice had sounded like it wanted to offer me war bonds or something, and, well, I'd expected to come back after a couple of days and maybe get to talk to them again. That wasn't going to happen, though. F-04 had been reclassified as a high priority, and communication with them was on a strictly need-to-know basis. I was told to return to my workstation and continue to send messages into the void, but there was a new addition to my desk. There was a little black box with a flashing light on it, a label maker stamp declaring it to be the line to F-04. in case of direct communication. If it rang, I was to pick it up immediately and send it to whoever was on the other end upstairs. My hours had been changed to reflect a small promotion. I had now been placed on the 3 to 11 shift, something that would fit in much better with my college hours. I had been on midnights before that, and it had been hard to adjust to a midday sleep schedule while still maintaining my schoolwork. Now I could come in after my last class and get to bed before daylight. All in all, it was a pretty good system. And so, I got back to work, started hunting for another signal. I started sending out messages to the rest of F. Whoever had been doing it while I was away was up to F89, and I fell back into the general expectation of short bursts of static or nothing at all. I kept hoping for another voice on the other end, but as the first shift went on, I began to wonder if I'd ever find another return message. It was about 9:30, and I'd been thinking about getting off soon, when suddenly, the F4 phone began to chirp. My current supervisor was very different from the red-faced man I'd drunk with. He had said that if it had happened, I was to pick it up immediately and transfer it upstairs. I picked it up, preparing to send the call to the higher-ups, but before I could tell them to hold on and that I was transferring them, I heard something strange on the other end. There was no plummy war bond salesman on the end of this call, and what I heard got my neck hairs up a bit. It was mechanical, though the voice was human enough to make me wonder. The cadence, however, was too perfect to be anything but a machine. But who could really say? Boots, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Hello? I said, thinking perhaps I'd crossed the signal somewhere. Just a minute while I transfer you upstairs. If there was actually someone on the other end, they didn't say anything. They just kept repeating whatever it was they were reading from. Don't, 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 don't. Look at what's in front of you. I asked again if they needed something, but they just kept right on, going on with the poem or message or whatever it was. The cadence made it sound like a military march, something that Marines might step to as they went about their physical training. And again, the hairs on the back of my neck lifted up. I'd heard it before. It was something old that I couldn't place. And as I listened, it went on. Men, 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 men go mad with watching them. Boots, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it began again from the beginning. I didn't ask if anybody was on the line. I just transferred it upstairs as I sat for the next hour and a half with a sense of cold dread wafting through me. I didn't know what I had just heard, but it didn't seem to be from the same as first contact. This hadn't been a person like the one that I'd first spoken to. This had been different. When I went home at the end of my shift, I really hoped I would leave that message behind. It was just a weird occurrence, and I was too tired after work and school to give it much thought. I fell into bed with the marching tune still buzzing around my head, assuming it would fizzle on its own. I should have known better, but a man can hope. I dreamed those words again and again that night. By the time I woke up the next morning, I thought I might be a little mad myself. I had an email from my boss when I got to work that night. He thanked me for transferring the message from F4 the night before, but reminded me that I was to transfer such messages right away. He said that there was 10 seconds of the call that couldn't be accounted for, and wanted a report on what I had heard before I transferred it. Again, I would like to remind you that all transmissions from that particular dimension are to be sent directly upstairs in the future. Your continued assistance in this matter is appreciated. I felt adequately chastised, but tried not to let it bring me down. I got back to work, sending messages into the void and never getting an answer. I tried not to think about it, but It was hard not to remember the way the message had sounded. It had been human, of that I was certain, but it sounded hopeless was the best I could come up with. The voice sounded beaten down, devoid of any real emotion at all, and I wondered what kind of conditions could breed a voice like that. Also, who would have called us just to leave a cryptic message like that? It was a mystery, to be sure, and the more I thought about it, the more curious I became. After that first call, I received a call nightly from the strange poem reader. I always sent them up immediately after that, but it was hard not to hear the beginning of that cadence and get a sense of dread all over again. I got curious about the poem, too. I knew I had heard it somewhere, but I couldn't place it. It sounded military in origin, but I'd never been in the military, and I only knew a couple of people who had. The people I asked just shook their heads and said it sounded familiar, but they also couldn't place it. I started dreaming about it after that first night, and it was affecting the way I slept. It also made me wonder more about F4 and why they would feel so inclined to send out a warning or a message or whatever it was. I decided to do a little bit of snooping, just enough to satiate my appetite. My boss hadn't left, he had just been promoted, so I felt like he might be able to give me some information, if correctly plied. We'll call him Mark for the sake of the story. Mark and I hung out every now and again. We ran in similar circles, after all. And when I invited him out for drinks one evening, it didn't seem that weird. Mark was leading a different department now, and we didn't see as much of each other as we used to around the office. Eventually, the conversation turned towards my discovery. I was glad he had steered it in that direction. It would have looked bad if I'd done it myself. It wouldn't have felt like I was doing something right. It would have felt like I was leading him into a trap. "It's not every day that you make first contact," he said jokingly. "True," I said as I took a sip of Dutch courage. "But I'd give a week's pay to know what they've been talking about with the supervisors. I think about it sometimes, you know. The voice of the man on the other end, and I wonder what they're like." My old boss snorted as he took another drink. "Well, I can assure you, you're not missing out on much." "Oh? Have they said anything interesting?" Mark looked around as if he were worried that he might be under surveillance. And when he continued, he put his face very close to mine, as if sharing some great secret. "Whoever it is on the other side of that machine, they're very interested in us. They don't talk about themselves much. They're mostly interested in our technology. The thing they talk about..." He looked around again before going on. "Some of those things are quite astounding." "Interested in us? Why would they be interested in us? We're the ones who need help escaping our planet. How much could we give them?" "Well, I'll tell you, but you gotta keep it to yourself. This is pretty hush-hush stuff. I don't think they'd like it if they knew I was talking to you about it, but you're the one that found them, so maybe they'd understand." He took another conspiratorial look around, and when he was certain that we weren't being eavesdropped on, he went on. "They seem to be interested in our military. Most of their questions have been about the state of our weapons. They want to know what we're capable of, and whether we can help them enhance their own technology when it comes to warfare." I wanted to tell him that didn't make any sense, but in a way, I suppose it did. Hadn't I thought that the voice on the other end sounded like it was going to start selling me war bonds? All my mental analogies had pointed back to the World War II propaganda videos. So perhaps we had stumbled across a civilization that was at war with something they couldn't handle. I remembered again what they had called themselves, the Eden Coalition, and wondered what they could be fighting if everyone had decided to band together. What terrible thing could be in store for us if such enemies came to Earth? "Have they offered to share anything with us?" "Oh, yes.
They want to show us how to use the device to bring people to the other dimension. That sent my neck hair up. Really? Absolutely. They want to meet us and see what can be brought across from our world to theirs. He didn't bring it up again after that, and I suspect that he realized he'd said too much. We talked a little bit more, but he seemed distant for most of the conversation. The look on his face made me think that he might be contemplating whether what he told me was too much, and maybe what his bosses would make of it if they found out. The next day there was an email about not sharing sensitive information with those who didn't have the proper clearance. My old boss was never heard from again after that. Nothing was ever said to me, but the message was clear. The phone calls continued every night at 9:30 p.m., but now I just transferred them right away. The phrase, boots, 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 was all I ever caught before I sent it to the higher-ups. Starting to go a little crazy myself as the repetition burrowed into my subconscious. I'd find myself repeating it sometimes over and over again as I worked, but I was always careful not to let anyone hear me. They'd ghosted my old boss over loose talk. If they knew that I'd heard and was now repeating it to myself, then what would they do to me? Then one night, something different happened. It had been about a month since Mark had disappeared, and the buzz was that something big was happening. The guys upstairs had been working on something hush-hush, but the more secret the project, the more likely the bleed-out is. They had been up to look at the machine I was using to send messages, but they didn't say much. All I'd caught was a question that had been shushed quickly. A question about sending living things through the portal. Living things. They couldn't possibly be planning something like that. Could they? That night, same as the night before, the phone rang for F4. I picked it up, meaning to transfer it, but when the voice didn't immediately start yelling about boots, I stopped. It was a long pause, a sound like a breath being drawn in. And as I started to say hello, I heard a loud bang on the other end as someone began to shout. It was loud, making me pull my ear away from the phone, and as they began to yell out more of the chant, I nearly dropped it on the floor. Try to think of something different. Oh my God, keep me from going lunatic. Boots, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the... It was cut off abruptly after that. It was replaced by a loud static sound before one of those English, not English voices said hello from the other end. I was silent, trying not to move or speak, and that seemed to make the voice even angrier. Hello? Hello? Who is this? Who do you work for? We will find you. No one gets away with spying on the Eden... But I hung up on him then. I didn't send any more messages after that. I just grabbed my bag and left early. I was officially done with the night, and I didn't care what they thought about it. I was sure that they would pull me over with every mile I rolled, but when I pulled up at my house without being grabbed by people in a white van, I thought I might have gotten away scot-free. I tried to sleep, but the words of the marching chant ran through my head over and over again. Boots, 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 boots. What did it mean? Moving up and down again. Why did they keep sending it? Men go mad from watching them. What were they trying to tell me? If your eyes drop. I put my head under my pillow, but it was almost like I could hear the sound of them marching in my ears. They will get atop of you. I looked at my phone when it started to ring, peeking at it as it buzzed ominously. Try. There's only one person that could be calling me this late at night to think of something different. They'd found me missing and were looking for me.
Worse, they knew I'd listened to the phone call. What would they do to me? This was a government contract. I could be arrested for treason, sent to Leavenworth, or just vanished, like my old boss. They had my address. They could just come get me. Oh my God, keep. I reached for the phone with shaky hands, knowing it wouldn't make any difference, whether I picked it up or not. Me from going lunatic. Hello, I said, wetting my lips. Mr. Starn, it's Medici Labs. We need you to come back to the facility. Something's come up, and we need to speak with you urgently. Boots, 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 boots. I shook my head, trying to squash the chant. Very well, let me get dressed, and I'll be on my way, and there's a car waiting outside for you. It's a black town car. It'll be parked on the curve. Please hurry, Mr. Starn. Dr. Klein is very interested to speak with you. I hung up the phone, shaking a little as I got dressed. I'm writing this down before they take me. I don't know if I'll ever come back again, but I know I can't listen to that voice chant about boots anymore. Whatever's going on in that universe, whatever the Eden Coalition is doing, it isn't good. I pray I come back from this, but I fear I might find out firsthand what those marching boots look like. Perhaps that's where they've been sending the people they disappear. Perhaps I'll find out for myself what it's like in F-04.
Always fun working for an agency trying to play God. Our next tale is of an ambiguous little group who comes to someone in a time of weakness. So let's hum a few bars of Howard's song.
The smooth jazz buzzed through his ears as Howard finished correlating the numbers for his latest job. The Baxter account was coming along nicely. Howard felt quite sure that he would have the account books done before quitting time. It had been a hard job. Mr. Baxter had not kept good records, but he had finally chased down all those loose ends, and Howard cocked his head like a dog that's heard a sound he can't quite place. Had someone been calling him? The smooth jazz he always listened to when he worked was devoid of words. Words tended to distract him while he was working. He shook his head and got back to it. The account was nearly done, and he had a meeting in an hour to finalize it. He'd give his boss something to crow about this time. Charles Baxter was a very wealthy man, and his business would do wonders for the company. Howard bet his boss would give him a bonus after seeing all the excellent work he'd... Howard! Howard turned to look behind him. Someone had said his name, almost spoken it in his ear. As he looked around, he was perplexed as to where it was coming from. Looking back to the computer, he began to type again. His nerves were a little rattled at the thought of a disembodied voice and... Howard! Howard jumped and nearly overturned his chair. Someone had shouted his name, screamed it right into his ear. Even now, as he looked around his home office, he could see no one. Howard lived alone with no wife or children or roommates to distract him, and the thought of someone in his house made him very upset. This was his home, his place of refuge, and as he started to rise from his chair, he resigned himself to search the whole house until whoever was here was found. He had just opened the closet when the voice spoke again. "Sorry to startle you, Howard. Now that I've got your attention, I need to talk to you." Howard stared dumbly into the closet. The old jackets and blue storage bins did not begin to speak to him. No one sprang from concealment either to admit to the disturbance, and he came to realize that the voice was not coming from the house. The voice was not an intruder, or a disembodied ghost voice, of which he did not believe in. The voice seemed to be coming from his earbuds. The voice was that of an average, everyday person. Howard could have sat next to him on the bus, or chatted with him in line for his morning bagel. The voice was smooth, educated, and not too terribly unlike his own. This made Howard feel a little easier, a little calmer. As he stood looking into the coat closet, he felt less worried about home invaders, and more concerned about why someone in his earbuds knew his name. "Wonderful! Now that I have your attention, I need you to leave the house." That struck Howard as odd. Not that anything in this situation was expected, but leaving the house? Howard worked mostly from home, always had after his employer had determined that it was better for his productivity. As such, he had maintained a rigorous schedule, He really only left the house to get groceries once a week, and to visit a certain woman he liked. Their relationship was based on cash exchange only, of course, but he still had a schedule, and he liked to stick to it. You are in great danger, Howard. Men are coming to hurt you, men who don't want you to finish this account, and if you're still here when they arrive, I fear you won't live to see tomorrow. This filled Howard with unease. Who was coming to hurt him? Why did they care so much about the Baxter account? I know this must be very upsetting to you, Howard, but I need you to do exactly as I say, so we can get you out of this troublesome situation. Take all the relevant information you have on the account and put it into your briefcase. Take the hard drive out of your computer, the silver box on the second tray, and put it in there as well. You can just yank it right out. It should come free. I need you to do all of this in the next 5 minutes and be at the bus stop before 2 o'clock. Go on. Get started now. Howard felt himself hesitating. Who was this voice? Why was he talking to him? How did he know that this wasn't some trick to get him to screw up all the data on his computer? Still, years of being an accountant drone meant that he had already begun to scoop the papers into his briefcase, even as he thought things over. He was used to following orders, and really, this was just one more in a long line of orders. The side of his desktop came off easily. He had saved his documents, of course, and powered it off. Now he had the case open, though, and the nagging voice asked again if he thought he was doing the right thing. This was crazy. He was going to yank a piece out of his computer just because a voice in his earbuds told him to. How did he know he wasn't being fooled? How did he know he wasn't having a mental breakdown? For all he knew, he had created the voice, which hadn't spoken in about a minute, and now he was getting ready to break his computer. Quickly now, Howard. They're on their way, the voice said, not showing the slightest bit of interest one way or another. Howard reached in, feeling the heat from the components, and gripped the hard drive. He lifted it out of the cradle, but instead of yanking, he detached the cables and easily brought the box out. He looked at it as it ticked and cooled and put it in his briefcase. He closed the case, grabbed his hat from beside the door, and left his house. Don't bother locking up. You probably won't be back, said the voice in that who cares sort of way. Now, walk down to the bus stop and sit with the wall blocking your view of the house. Why wouldn't I come back to my house, Howard thought, but he moved to the bus station without really thinking. He was running on autopilot as he came to the bus station and just sat down. The longer he sat, the longer the voice remained silent, the more he doubted that it would come again. A woman with a bratty kid sat next to him, and he clutched his briefcase on his lap. The kid looked up from his gadget, a box that was spewing noise at an ear-splitting level, to tell his mom that he wanted McDonald's when they got wherever they were going. She just patted him and said she would. The kid turned his grubby face back to the gadget then, and gave no more thought to the conscious world whatsoever. That was when Howard saw the car. The black town car drove right past the bus station and into his driveway. 4 men in black suits climbed out and walked towards his door. One of them knocked, 3 loud clumps, and they all waited for 30 seconds in a state of impatient tension. They all had sunglasses on and shiny black shoes. Howard thought they looked like government agents in a spy movie. As he peeked around the bus station wall, he saw one of them drive that shoe right into the door after receiving no answer. As they filed in, he thought he saw them reach into their coats for something. But the voice came back just as a big silver bus pulled up in front of the stop. Never mind that, Howard. It's not your concern anymore. Just get on and take the bus to the number 12 stop. You can do that, can't you? As Howard flashed his bus pass and took his seat, he found that he could. He rode the bus for the better part of an hour. He kept a firm hand on his briefcase, and as he rode, his eyes kept sweeping around to look at the other riders. The bratty boy and his doting mother were a few seats away. The kid hadn't looked up from his gadget since he'd spoken to his mother, and she seemed to be busy watching the world go by. An older woman was sitting up near the front with the driver. Her clothes made him think that she might be homeless, and a young man with headphones on was sleeping near the back of the bus. The flashing sign near the front said that they were nearing stop number 4. If the stops were in some kind of order, it would be 8 more stops before it was his turn to get off. He glanced out the window as they drove, the bus stopping occasionally, but rarely picking anyone up. The voice in his earbuds hadn't spoken for a while. He was again beginning to wonder if he'd made the whole thing up. Here he was, on a bus, with his work and his hard drive in a briefcase, like some kind of spy. Maybe he had been working too hard. Maybe his boss was right, and he really did need to take some time off. I don't want to alarm you, Howard, but it seems that the men in the town car are following you. Howard bristled. He turned his head slightly and could see the black town car and traffic behind the bus. The windows were polarized, so they couldn't see in, but they certainly knew where he was. It would be easy to find out if he had come onto this bus. He didn't exactly blend in. And then, what would they do? Would they gun him down on the bus in front of all these people? Would they arrest him? Why were they after him? I need you to get off at the next stop, Howard. Don't hesitate. Don't look around. Just step off the bus and take the alley to your left. Howard pulled the handle over his head, and when the bus stopped, he calmly walked out onto the busy sidewalk. The doors closed, and the bus rolled on into traffic. Behind it, the town car followed, being none the wiser that Howard had gotten off. He scanned the crowd and found the alley to his left. He took it, clutching the briefcase as he walked along the garbage cans. He didn't see anyone lingering around, and as he came out onto the other side of the busy street, he began to relax a little. There were no black town cars waiting for him, and that gave him some small amount of reassurance. Now, cross the street and take the next alley to the number 12 stop. There will be a taxi waiting for you there. Take it to your destination. Howard glanced around, unsure until he finally saw the alley. It sat between an Italian restaurant and a computer repair store. Howard could see the large green dumpster that took up most of the lane, and knew it would be a squeeze to get around it. He started across the busy street, and was met by the sounds of horns honking and people cursing. He hurried across like a frightened rabbit, and made the alley before the screeching tires had stopped. The alley was awash with graffiti and the old smells of pasta. Someone had hung some band poster on the wall, but it did little to add to the place's charm. The dumpster was a stinking edifice of green and chrome. Howard was no dainty flower, but he shimmied around it with very little problem. He winced when his stomach rubbed against the filthy dumpster, but he was clear a moment later, and nearly out of the alley. "Stop," the voice said, and suddenly Howard was against the wall. He made himself as small as he could, and saw the black town car pull up next to the bus stop. "Don't move. Just be still, and they won't see you," said the oily voice in his ear. The man who had kicked in his door stepped out of the car. He bulged in his suit, a mountain of muscles, and Howard had little trouble believing that that man so easily booted in his door. He stepped out and walked to the bus stop. The bus Howard had departed, pulling up and offloading the few passengers. He looked hard at the mother and the brat, the child sticking his tongue out at him, and at the old lady who shuffled up the street. The bull stepped onto the bus and looked around, exchanging words with the driver before climbing off. He and the man in a taxi had another conversation, his town car blocking the sidewalk, which ended with the taxi honking and cursing and speeding away. The town car left a few seconds later, and Howard breathed a sigh of relief. A new taxi pulled up a minute later, and the driver asked Howard if his name was Howard Kernst. Howard climbed in, and they pulled into traffic. They drove until they hit the city limits. Howard had expected to go uptown to one of the glass edifices that marked the government buildings or the high-scale holdings. He had expected to be greeted by a man in a suit who would tell him that he had done well and explain all this. Instead, they drove into the desert. The driver didn't speak, he just drove. Howard was becoming nervous. The men in the town car had been one thing, but what if the man in the earpiece was worse? He tested the door and found that it was locked. He checked the windows and found that they wouldn't open. He tapped on the glass, but the man behind the wheel ignored him. "Patience, Howard," the man soothed. "All your questions will be answered soon." Howard settled a little, but as they drove deeper into the desert, he began to wonder what was happening. Howard was just an accountant, a great accountant, but still an accountant. Things like this didn't happen when you were just an accountant. You might get a paper cut or stub your toe on an average day, but certainly not get yourself involved in clandestine conspiracies or life-or-death struggles. Hell, the files he had from the Baxter account weren't even that interesting. Baxter owed a lot of money to the government, had a lot of back taxes, but Howard had managed to clear that up. His orders had been to make the problem go away, and he had. When the car stopped, Howard was jerked out of his contemplation. They had stopped outside a rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere. Howard must have been wool-gathering for longer than he thought, because the sun was dipping low in the sky behind said station, and the afternoon was beginning to sink into evening. A sensible black sedan was parked in front of the gas station, and as they approached, a man opened the door for Howard and ushered him out. The man was wearing a black suit, much like Howard's pursuers, and his sunglasses reflected Howard's scared face back at him as he climbed from the taxi. The taxi driver accepted an envelope from the man, neither speaking a word, and the cab pulled away, leaving Howard and the man standing in front of this rundown gas station. "Right this way, Mr. Kernst," said the man, and the two walked towards the station. It was a tatty thing, gas pumps gone all brown and flaky, the glass crashed out in the windows, a single spindle rack spinning sluggishly in the wind, with a single bloated magazine on it. Howard had seen 1,000 of them in his time, utterly forgettable, and he feared to die in a place like this and become as forgotten as the old station. The thought was sudden, but he couldn't get it loose as soon as he had thought it. He was like a dog who's finally caught his tail and now can't let it go again. Howard was suddenly sure that this would be the place he died. The two walked around the back of the station, and there was a man in a folding chair, a beach umbrella covering him from the sun. He was dressed in a white suit, little blue piping roaming up the jacket. He had a fat, jolly face, hair the color of snow, and a pair of sunglasses with some reflective lenses Howard had become used to seeing. He smiled when he saw Howard, and the smile was genuine and warm. He pulled an earpiece out as they approached, and spread his pudgy arms wide as though to hug him. "At last, Mr. Kernst, at last you've arrived. May I call you Howard? It seems silly to rest on formalities after we've been through so much." Howard didn't trust him from the instant he opened his mouth until the end of his life. The man had a showy way of speaking, like a carnival barker or a snake oil salesman. He was the kind of man who turned everything into a Shakespearean presentation. He thought himself a showman, but really, he was just dramatic for the sake of drama. Howard hated people like that. The man seemed to pick up on some of his distaste. "I imagine you have a dozen questions, maybe 24, and I want to answer them all, but I fear we don't have time. The biggest question I assume you have is why these men are chasing you, yes?" Howard nodded a little sullenly. "Well, the answer is quite simple. The men are, of course, my own." "Yours?" Howard asked, perplexed. "Of course. You see, if you had something I wanted, and there was no sense of urgency, you might start to ask questions. You might question the voice that suddenly popped into your head. You might not have come all this way into the desert on my order if I hadn't made the stakes a little high for you." He pulled a cigarette out of a silver case he had in his jacket, and Howard flinched when he saw the case come free. For half a second, he had seen a small silver handgun come out of that jacket, and he knew his life was about to end. The man flipped the case closed, but offered it to Howard before he put it away. Howard declined, and the man slid it back into his pocket with the same disappointment. The man who had escorted him from the taxi stepped close, flicking an expensive lighter and holding it to the end of the cigarette. Howard considered running into the desert while he was occupied. Catching a bullet in the back, however, did not seem much better than dying right here. "Now then, I imagine you'd like to know why I went to all this trouble to get the papers you have in your briefcase. Well, that's a little more complicated. You see, Charles Baxter has made some very important people very angry. He's made enemies out of the kind of men who don't really get mad. They get even. And in 22 hours, he will cease to exist forever. He will be erased from life, erased from memory, and erased from time." Howard gaped. Who was this guy? How exactly did you go about erasing someone from time? Charles Baxter was a fat cat around here, probably one of the most prominent businessmen in 3 states, but surely he was small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, right? So, as you can see, it's very inopportune for you to have files that prove this man existed at all. Charles Baxter is already dead. His associates are, as we speak, being ferreted out. You, Howard, are the last loose end we need to tie up. But why kill me just for having this information?" The man shrugged noncommittally. "Because it's easier than having you reprogrammed. At the end of the day, you're an unmarried accountant whose absence will go unremarked. You have no family, no real friends, not even any pets to mark their bowl's emptiness. You've lived an unremarkable life, Howard. Your death will be much the same." He threw the cigarette into the sand, half smoked, and held his hands out towards Howard. "Now then, the case, please." It was said nice enough, but Howard knew that it wasn't a request. The man was used to giving orders and having them followed, and for a moment, Howard thought about refusing him. He would die here, he knew that, but maybe he could die with some dignity. Perhaps he could die having fought against something that didn't seem right. He held onto the case for a few seconds, not sure what he meant to do with it, but in the end, he found himself handing the case to the man under the umbrella. At the end of the day, He was just an accountant, after all. The man accepted the case, smiling, and this time the hand that came out of the suit coat did contain a small silver handgun. "Thank you, Howard. You've been very helpful." The gun went off, and Harold felt the slug enter his body. It burned for a few seconds, then he felt nothing. Howard's life ended in much the same way he had lived it, without much fuss.
Truly, no good deed goes unpunished. Our next story is about a strange email about a job that was too good to be true. So let's learn a little more about the email from Mazer Inc.
The job was too good to be true. I understand that now. The message had popped up in my inbox like 1,000 before it. It sat nestled between a "Buy Viagra Online" and a "Congratulations! You've just win a free iPad" email. But as I hovered my mouse over it, I found myself intrigued by the tagline. I could usually spot spam messages, even the ones my inbox seems incapable of catching. This one, though, something about it caught my eye. The spelling and grammar were on point, and something about it just screamed attention. I moved my cursor over the box and hovered it over the email. Preparing to break the cardinal rule, I read the title one more time. Mazer Inc. seeking subjects for free at-home testing. I clicked it, and a very official-looking email informed me that I had been randomly selected to take part in a clinical trial. The email detailed the parameters for this test, the time frame for the test, and the payment method for completion of the test. The parameters were basically A. Take the required supplement they sent you with breakfast and dinner. B. Sign on and watch a series of videos every day for 2 hours. They would involve color patterns, pictographs, and several other standard mental tests. And C. You wear the required Mazer Inc. monitor device while I slept so they could monitor my brain activity and the effects of the supplement. For the price they were quoting, it sounded like a great job. I'd have been a fool not to look into it. I looked the company up online first. It's pretty easy to see which companies are scams these days and which are legit. Mazer Inc. was a publicly traded company, and they did a lot of business in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. They had a few squibs in the news about questionable business practices, but who didn't these days? At the end of the day, they looked on the level, so I applied to their email, thinking I'd never hear back from them again. The return email came a few hours later, thanking me for agreeing to the trial and saying they would ship out my initial package and my initial payment the same day. 3 days later, there was a brown cardboard box on my front doorstep from Mazer Inc., the logo stamped prominently across the side of the box. I hadn't expected it so soon, but the extra money was a nice bonus. Most of my work has been from home these days, and the little bit of it that I was getting was barely keeping the lights on and the rent paid. COVID was still making working in an office difficult, and in these troubled times, every little bit helped. I opened the box and found 8 bottles of something called NeuroBoost. They came in standard 120 capsule bottles and looked perfectly normal, just like something you'd buy at CVS. The monitor turned out to be something similar to an Apple Watch. It had a shiny black band and a smart little face that displayed heart rate, blood pressure, and other general health statistics. I slipped it on, but was confused when I didn't see anywhere to charge it. I shrugged, figuring maybe the internal batteries would last a while. There was also a check stapled to a set of instructions telling me how to get onto the Mazer Inc. website so that I could take my daily mandatory testing. For the amount they were paying, it seemed like a pretty sweet deal if all I had to do was watch a few videos and take some pills and watch the movies for 2 hours a day. When I got up the next morning, there was a bright display on the front of the watch reminding me to take my pills and do my training. So I got up and made some breakfast, took my pills, and got ready for my day. The pills were oily and gave me some fairly rancid burps, but they weren't too bad. When the watch reminded me at noon that I needed to take my training for the day, I sat down at my computer and got to it. The videos were mostly a series of color patterns, flashing in quick succession, as well as a series of brain games that had me doing math or solving puzzles. I guess the pills were supposed to boost my cognitive functions, and I wanted to see if it had affected my scores on the games as badly as the text did. If it did, I couldn't tell. And after my mandatory 2 hours, I closed it up and opened my work folder to see if there was anything new from the office. For the next couple of weeks, everything was fine. I took my pills twice a day, did my mandatory testing, and wore my armband religiously. I found that I liked having it on after a while. It was very comfortable, and being able to glance down and look at my vitals was kind of nice. I've never really had the money for fancy tech, so having something that sort of looked like fancy tech was nice. At the time, I would have told you everything was fine for about the first 2 weeks. But after a few days, I began to notice some strange things around my apartment. It was subtle stuff at first. Things moved, items missing that reappeared a few days later, but it was something more subtle than that as well. Sometimes it felt like someone else had been in my apartment. But that was crazy. The chain was always on, the door was always locked, and, at least to my knowledge, I was the only one that had been in my house since about a week before the quarantine. I thought at the time that I was just being neurotic. But now that I look back on it, I'm pretty sure there was more to it than I was picking up on. The first real sign came to me while I was watching the color patterns one day. I'd been taking the pills for about 2 weeks when one day I watched the colors go from quick flashes of green and blue and yellow and saw a picture. It was just for a second, nothing really substantial, but it looked like a street. It wasn't a street that I knew, and it looked as though it had been torn up by something. I didn't get a good look at it. It was only a flash for a second, but I had to double take to see if I had actually seen what I'd seen. I kept a closer eye on them from then on, but I didn't see anything else that day. The program moved on to math problems a few seconds later, but I never quite forgot about that picture for the rest of the day. That's probably why I remembered it later. I was scrolling through Facebook later, just getting ready to drop off, kind of checking it over without really reading anything, when a friend's post jumped out at me. He was ex-military, and he was talking about an attack in Kabul that day, talking about how the military needed to do more or something, when the same street appeared in his picture. It had been the site of a bombing, and the street was destroyed, just as I'd seen it earlier. I sat dry-mouthed for a minute, just mulling it over in my head. The longer I did, the more I kind of began to make excuses for it. It was very strange, but I eventually chalked it up to similarities. I hadn't actually seen that particular street. I was just seeing it now and associating it with what I'd seen earlier. There was no way I had seen the site of an attack before it had even happened. It just wasn't the sort of thing that normal people did. I turned my phone off and rolled over, going to sleep as I told myself it had never come up again. The next day, however, I woke up and found that my shoes were missing. It wasn't like they were expensive or anything, just a pair of Walmart New Balances, but it was the fact that they were missing that confused me. I'd set them beside the door 4 days ago when I'd last left the house. There was no reason in the world that they should be gone, but they were. I could still see the mud from the running track on the carpet by the door, the only proof that they'd been there at all. I searched the house, thinking maybe I'd just put them down somewhere and forgotten about it, but they were nowhere to be found. That made me worried, but again, I put it out of my mind. I was just going stir-crazy from the quarantine, that was all. I just needed to get out more. I'd been taking the pills for about a month when I started seeing more pictures. It happened suddenly. One minute I was seeing red and yellow and blue and purple go by, and the next second they were solidifying into pictures. A Walmart somewhere, a Jeep out in the desert, a shoe left on a beach, a bunch of sunflowers, on and on and on. The colors were gone. I never saw them again. From then on, it was just random pictures. I called the number on the back of the bottle after reading it over to see if there were any side effects. After finding the helpline, the one that says to call if you have any adverse reactions, I waited for the robot call to cease and for a person to pick up. To my surprise, someone picked up right away, and I was spared the indignity of wading through the muck. The lady in customer service listened to what I had to say, took down my employee ID, and told me that this was completely normal. She told me that lots of people reported the colors becoming pictures. It was actually very common to get these sort of calls. She said that if it became anything worrisome, to let them know, but seeing the pictures was completely natural. I hung up, feeling a lot better. I kept feeling better until that night. Until I woke up in the middle of my living room with no earthly idea how I'd gotten there. I had my hand wrapped around the doorknob, and I was fully dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. I was wearing a pair of black boots that I didn't recognize, and I had my car keys in my hand. I'd clearly been going somewhere, but I had no memory of deciding to leave. I'd been getting ready for bed the last I remembered, easing under the covers and just getting snug down for the evening. I remembered falling asleep, though I clearly didn't remember waking back up. I sat up for the rest of the night, a cup of coffee in hand to make sure that I didn't try to slip off and sleepwalk somewhere. I had never had a history of sleepwalking, but I'd heard that people could pick it up later in life. Sleep dressing yourself and sleep driving were something I'd never heard of, but I suppose anything was possible. That day I went out and bought a stopper to put under the door. I bought a flipper lock and installed it myself. I would have put a second deadbolt on as well if I hadn't rented the apartment. I thought if I made it more difficult for myself to leave, I might not sleepwalk outside. If I wanted to blunder around my apartment, that was one thing. Going out with no memory of the outside was another, especially if I'd been intending to drive. I had been taking the pills for about 2 months at this point, but I never equated them to what was going on. I think maybe I just didn't want to. I liked the way they made me feel, and I especially liked the extra money I was getting every month for taking them. Some of the pictures I'd been seeing had come up again. The shoe on the beach had turned out to be a little card from a plane crash over Spain. The Walmart had been celebrating its 20-year anniversary when someone had driven a car through the festivities. I had stopped really looking for them anywhere. I didn't really want to know what they were. I had my own problems to worry about. I'd woken up several times since the first night, standing in different rooms and having no clue how I'd gotten there. I woke up in the kitchen, toast burning in the toaster. I shook awake in the shower, fully clothed as the water fell over me. I came to on the floor of my living room with my legs under the couch, and I awoke several times as I fumbled at the lock on my apartment. Whatever was happening to me, my body seemed to be trying to keep me from hurting myself, and for that I was pretty grateful. I think my body knew the pills were doing something strange to me, but my brain was trying its best to justify the actions. It seemed like my brain might be keeping secrets from the rest of us, secrets that I would find out pretty soon. Then one day, I woke up somewhere different. I woke up as I was standing in a factory, preparing to break a tank full of cloudy liquid with a fire axe. I dropped the axe that I'd been preparing to shatter the glass with and looked around in confusion. Where the hell was I? How had I gotten here? I looked around and could see other people causing general destruction as well, but they didn't seem to have come to like I had. They were destroying lab equipment, factory equipment, and anything else they could get their hands on. They were like a group of mindless ants, swarming over everything they couldn't destroy themselves and wrecking it with sheer numbers. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I had to get the hell out of there. No one came to stop me as I ran, so I took off and didn't stop running till I was outside. Turned out I was actually somewhere I knew. I'd been inside the Terminus Chemical Building. I'd seen the building many times from the freeway, but I'd never actually been inside it. I had a vague idea of what they did, medical research or chemical trials or something, but I couldn't have told you why I'd been there destroying things. I started moving, making my way for the freeway, and when I got there I managed to thumb a ride and get back to the general vicinity of my apartment. It was the middle of the night when I got out of the building, and the sun was just starting to get up when I got home. For the next 3 days I stayed inside and strapped myself into bed every night. I stopped taking the pills and stopped logging onto the website for my daily training. It appeared that I might have lost my monitor while I was busily destroying the factory, but I was honestly glad to have it off me. My phone rang a few times from unlisted phone numbers, but I never picked them up. I was done taking their drugs and being their guinea pig, if that's all I was. On the 3rd day, someone knocked on the door. After a few minutes of peeking through the peephole, I opened it slowly and glanced mousily through the crack. The monitor was on the front mat, sitting like a bomb on the rough fibers. On top was a note, my name written on the back of a folded Polaroid. I reached for it, not wanting it, but needing to see it. The picture was no grainy Polaroid, but a highly detailed photo of me as I smashed a tank of cloudy liquid with the axe I'd swung that night. On the picture was a little caption that read, "Can you see any colors in this picture? Take your pills, do your training, put on your monitor, and get back to work, lest we send this picture to the police and let them know what you've been up to on your nightly excursions."
One more story for you, and I promise I've saved a pretty good one for last. We're going to hear about a man going up against an agency that maybe is a little out of his league. So let's hear a story about how they sent him a message he couldn't refuse.
I'm not proud of it, but when you receive one of those calls about your car's extended warranty, it's sometimes me. I'm a writer, a published writer, with an agent, a bestseller, and everything. 5 years ago, I was number 3 on several bestseller lists. 5 years ago, Oprah featured my book on her book list. 5 years ago, I sat on Ellen DeGeneres and promoted the crap out of my book, a move that netted me the house I now live in. It was a good year for me, and when my agent suggested that I write a sequel, I jumped at the chance. 5 years later, my sequel is finally coming together. But the bills don't stop just because your royalties and your residuals stop rolling in. My wife went back to her job at the grocery store, something to help pay the bills while I was working on my book. But it just wasn't enough. We had lived a little too grandly for the last 4 years, and now the money was gone. I told her I was paying the bills out of the residuals, but in reality, it was the salary I made working call center jobs like this one. Call center jobs are pretty easy, all things considered. You read a script, you call gullible people and offer them goods and services. You rake in little bonuses when you manage to trick the old or the infirm. It also allows me to work from home so I can proofread pages and research chapters while I cold call people in my pajamas. You get a lot of hate, a lot of people playing games, but that kind of thing is easy to ignore. Hell, I did retail for 8 years when I was young, and it's given me a pretty thick skin. It was easy to ignore when you realize that whether you made the sale or not, you were still going to receive a check at the end of the week. It was a pretty good gig, until I cold called someone I shouldn't have. The voice that picked up the phone was deep, cultured, and I should have known that it wasn't a voice of someone that could be fooled with such a cheap trick. He was the last number on my sheet for the day, and I figured I had nothing to lose. "Yes, sir, I'm calling you about your car's extended warranty. Do you still own the 2013 Link? Does this ever actually work?" I stumbled for a moment, choosing to roll on with the script rather than break character. "Lincoln, the warranty is nearing its expiration, and we're offering select customers a... This is the 5th call I've received from your company today, young man." I started to ignore it, like I'd ignored the others, but I figured I'd pick up this time and see what was so important. I see now that the answer was nothing. I tried to stay in character, but it was hard in the face of his frank honesty. "Look, I'm just doing my job, sir. I've got bills to pay and a family to feed, same as you. If you aren't interested, then I'll..." "Oh, a family man! Is that why you take the elderly for their pensions and scam the mentally handicapped for their hard-earned money? Such a provider. I'm sure your children would be proud of their father." He said it in such a matter-of-fact way that I almost didn't register it as an insult. I could have hung up on him. He wasn't the worst offender I'd had all day. But something about his voice rankled me. Where did this guy get off? He was going to sit here and tell me how rotten it was to make my money this way, like I didn't already know? Where the heck did he get off? "Look, buddy, there's no reason for any of that. We're just calling to let you know about your warranty program. If you don't want it, then I'll just..." He cut me off again. "Don't worry about it, friend. I'm sure you'll have more prevalent things to worry about soon enough. Ciao." The line went dead then, and the silence seemed ominous. I sat the phone down like I thought it might blow up. I'd been threatened on the phone before, but this one felt different. There'd been no screaming, no cursing, no invitations to screw myself, or questions about how I slept at night. I shuddered a little, suddenly feeling like a goose had walked over my grave. I jumped a little when I saw my son standing in the doorway, scratching his neck. Michael had wandered into my office while I was on the phone. I turned to him as he stood scratching, his hand moving up and down his back, before asking if he was okay. He'd been napping, something he would have to give up when he started school next year, and it seemed that his itchy back had woken him slightly ahead of schedule. "Daddy, my back is so itchy." I told him to go lay in bed while I grabbed the cream and the lotion. His mother and I called it Triceratops cream, something that always made Michael laugh, and it seemed to be the only thing that helped with his eczema when it got really bad. It's something he's suffered with since he was very young. We've had to wash his clothes with dye-free detergent, use special soap during his baths, and stay far away from things like wool. So I grabbed the cream and the lotion so I could lather him up and bring his itching to an end. As I slid his shirt off, however, I worried there might be something else going on here. Michael's back was covered in boils. A swath of small pustules with white heads were scattered over his pink skin, and they looked like pimples. There were clusters of small patches, islands of blight on a sea of normal skin, and I was honestly a little afraid to touch them. Nevertheless, I mixed the cream together and rubbed them onto his back, feeling him jump as some of the boils burst beneath my fingers. He seemed to relax when I finished, thanking me as he slid his shirt down gingerly. That was how it started. I wish I could say that was where it ended. I was proofing pages when my daughter, Michelle, arrived home from school. She stumbled into my office, her hands scratching at the back of her neck absent-mindedly, as she hugged me and told me about her day. We'd done this ever since her first day of school, and it was one of her daily rituals. She'd taken a test she believed she'd done well on, found $1 in the storm grate near the house, and told Jenny that she was being mean to Sara, so the two were no longer friends. I listened to her in a detached way, nodding and mm-hmming as she talked, noticing her scratching her neck a couple of times. The scratching didn't seem peculiar. People scratch sometimes, but I couldn't help but notice the red patch of skin on the back of her neck as she left to go start her homework. I turned back to my work, but sighed as I noticed the time. I saved my work and locked my computer. I had hardly gotten through half the chapter I was working on, but it was time to get started on dinner before my wife got home. The pork chops were cooking in the air fryer when my wife came through the door. I smiled as I turned to pull her against me, kissing the top of her head as she leaned warmly into me. She shuddered a little as my hands touched her back, but said it was just some back pain from standing all day. Mary called out again, so I was the only one working the register. Again. It was 8 straight hours of standing behind the register, listening to people complain. How'd your book proofing go today? I turned away from her, pretending to stir the potatoes as I answered. Stephanie could always tell when I was lying. Pretty good. Lots of progress. I'm sure it'll be ready for my agent in a few weeks. That's fantastic, dear. I'm sure it will be as much of a hit as your last one, she said, pressing a kiss on my stubbly cheek. I smiled, but I really wasn't so sure. It all came down to this latest book, it seemed. I just had to finish my book. I just had to write another hit. I just had to find my way back onto the bestseller list and get myself out of Dutch. Easy, right? The next morning I awoke determined to get some work done today. I would make up for my lack of work the day before and end with some real progress. I still had over 200 pages to proof, and if I didn't get them done fairly quickly, there would be no time to send them off, and quite likely I'd have to sit through notes on a second draft. As I went to wake my daughter up for school, however, I heard the hoarse cough coming from my son's room. I cracked the door to find him lying on his stomach, his shirt off and his back worse than the day before. His skin was broken out in red, angry boils, and the small white-headed blemishes of the day before had become larger and redder, their tips filled with translucent pus. He was softly moaning, his eyes begging for me to make the pain stop as they pulsated. My wife came out of the bedroom then, getting ready for work, and saw Michael's back. She ran to him, careful not to touch any of the spots, and asked me if he'd had these since yesterday. He was broken out, I said honestly, startled by the sudden appearance of the large angry boils, but it wasn't this bad. I put on lotion and cream, and he seemed to feel a lot better. Stephanie started talking quietly to herself, mostly arguing with herself about whether she could find someone to cover for her, but I told her I could take Michael to the pediatrician. Heck, what was the point of being a stay-at-home husband if I couldn't take my son to the doctor? She asked if I was sure. She knew I had work to do today, but I told her that it was nothing. I told her to go to work and that I would handle things here. I told Michael to stay in bed, not wanting him to aggravate any of the blisters he had on his back, and went to go wake Michelle up so she didn't miss her bus. I was in for another surprise when I got to her room. I opened her door and was immediately buffeted by the sound of her racking cough and her low groans from the bed. She was warm to the touch, not overly so, but definitely fevered, and I asked how she was feeling. She said it felt like she had the flu. Her throat hurt, she was hot, and her whole body ached. My wife was getting ready by then, stepping into the shower before she stepped into her uniform, and I figured it would be just as easy to make an appointment for 2 kids as it would for 1. I told Michelle to get some clothes on and that I would make an appointment for her and Michael. With all the COVID paranoia still floating around, it was pretty easy to get an appointment last minute with the symptoms they were presenting. One phone call to an after-hours nurse later, and I prepared to trade all my editing and proofreading time before work for time spent sitting in the car until it was our turn to go to the back. It was an hour and a half before we made it in, and I tried to make the most of it by doing some edits on my phone. It was slow and tedious, the two of them glued to their phones or their gadgets in the back seat as they hacked and coughed, but I managed to get a little bit of work done before they sent me a text saying they were ready for us in the back. 30 minutes later, their pediatrician came back with very little by way of an explanation. Well, they don't have COVID, or the flu, or anything else that I can test for here. What they do have is a high fever, a very wet cough, and troubling boils all over their back. Michelle too, I asked, having not been aware that she was sporting boils as well. Michelle too, she confirmed. Her outbreak isn't as bad as Michael's, but it's getting worse. I'd recommend that you keep them at home until it clears up. Don't touch the sores with your bare hands, and if you happen to by accident, be sure to disinfect your hands with alcohol. Wear gloves and a mask when you interact with them, and go to the hospital if you or your wife start presenting symptoms. I'm hoping it clears up on its own, but if it doesn't in a day or two, you should take them to the hospital anyway. I bundled them back into the car, a handful of prescriptions in my pocket, and called my wife as I went about getting their medications and getting them home. All of this, the meds, the visit, everything, was going to cost some, and I needed to get them settled so I could log some hours at work. My wife's insurance wasn't very good, and the money I made would be crucial if I wanted to get out of debt. I also had to find some time to work on my book, knowing in the back of my mind that it was the secret to solving my current problems. Stephanie picked up on the third ring, and the cough she rumbled into the phone sounded suspiciously like the ones from the back seat. She swore it was just allergies, and commiserated with me about the diagnosis. She wished she could be there, but said that she would likely be late this evening. Mary had called out, again, and she was the only one working register today. It was noon before I got everyone medicated, set up in their rooms with lunch and toys and entertainment, and sat down at my computer so I could begin my day. As I took calls and proofed pages, I felt a little bubble of anxiety every time someone picked up the phone. I was still a little rattled by yesterday's call, but all of my calls today seemed normal enough. I actually had 2 people give me their information and buy one of the garbage warranties we offered. I had no idea whether they worked or not, but the company was paying me to make calls, not research their products. In between calls, I peeked in on the kids to make sure they were okay. Michael spent most of the day sleeping, his breath heavy and wet, and Michelle just looked at me whenever I peeked in on her, seeming listless and barely there. I gave them more meds and made sure they had juice and liquids, and kept an eye on their temperatures as I took calls in between my nursing duties. As the sun set, I began to get worried about my wife. She should have been home by now, should have been home a half an hour ago, and I was just about to call her when I heard the door pop loudly open. She was laid out on the floor of the living room, her coughs deep and wet, her own blemishes peeking from the collar of her work shirt. I took them all to the hospital then, just bundled them into the car and went. The ER didn't know what to make of them, but we've all been quarantined upstairs now as I try to figure out why I haven't gotten sick with the same symptoms as the rest of my family. They are working hard to manage their fevers. All 3 of them are around 103, and they're laid out on their stomachs as their boils have become very fragile. They're afraid that popping them might lead to sepsis, but the longer I look at them, the more intrigued by them I become. I've been sitting in the room for the last few hours, my only company the beeping of their machines, and as I sat next to my wife, I noticed something strange. The boils on her back seemed to be forming a pattern, the swoops almost looking like a picture. I sat stroking her hand, Stephanie groaning in and out of consciousness, and the longer I looked, the more I realized the swoops are words. Moving over to Michael, I can see he has similar words, all picked out in the pustulant boils that mark his baby-fine skin. I brought my phone out and snapped pictures of their backs, the 3 of them requiring a little turning and moving before the messages were visible. I'm sitting here now as I contemplate telling the doctor what I've found. I don't think it'll help, but I don't know what to make of it either. It can't be what I believe it is, but I can't think of any other explanation for the words that I'm reading swirled across the painful backs of my family. The message reads, I've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty.
And just like that, our stories are over for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back very soon with more cozy horror from yours truly. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.